Hey Oasis Youth, this is Youth Pastor Sam here. I have a Covational for you this morning that I think will be very helpful for all of us. Have you ever seen the movie Megamind before? It's one of my favorite movies. And if you haven't seen it before, well, spoiler warning, kind of. It's not really a huge movie, but you'll get over it. Anyways, so Megamind is a supervillain at the very beginning of this film. And he actually takes down the superhero of his town. And he becomes the supervillain of the city. And he rules it all, and he gets bored. He gets bored of his position because he's got no superhero to fight with. He's won it all. And so what happens is he ends up giving superpowers to this tech boy named Hal. Hal is a super geek, super nerd kind of guy. His job is to run a camera for the news reporter. And the problem with Hal receiving superpowers is that Hal does not want to be a superhero. That he talks about how being good is so boring. Being good is so lame. He wants to be a bad guy now. And so Hal and Megamind, they duke it out. Megamind ends up beating Hal, who should have been the superhero. I think there's a tendency here in this movie that we can all relate to. And in fact, if you look at statistics on role-playing games for video games or for other role-playing scenarios, even as kids, if you remember as a kid, role-playing imaginary games, there's a tendency, isn't there, to go from being the good guy to making less good decisions as a good guy. Can you relate to that? I can. That in playing a game, you come across an innocent chicken, and of course I gotta kill the chicken, and then all of a sudden it's a crime, and you end up finding your way out of there and committing treasonous acts. I've been there. I don't know if you have. But I think there's a tendency within all of us to be the bad guy. To want to be a bad guy. We want internally to be a good guy, but there's certain moments, if we're being really honest, where we're tempted to be the bad guy, to make bad choices, to make unwise choices. Because we want what we can get for that short amount of time. In this season of life, as we're almost to the midway of November, as we are having our church doors closed for the time being, schools might be going back to online as life begins to shift and the school year begins to come to a close. The stress begins to grow higher. Tension at home might begin to resume to back where it was back in March or April. It might be really tempting right now to give in to the unwise choices that go against the commitments that you made at summer camp, that you might have made at youth group a couple weeks ago. The commitment that I want to follow the Lord, I want to serve the Lord, I want to follow Him wholeheartedly, I want Him to have my life, I want Him to guide me. You might be tempted to give that up. You might be tempted with small choices to slowly give in to walking away from God. This is how the enemy works. In fact, the road to hell is not a steep, slippery slope, it is a gradual decline. One choice after the other, and eventually you find yourself distant, far away from the God that you once chose to serve. An encouragement I want to give to you today comes from the book of Galatians, the letter of Galatians. It was written by the Apostle Paul to the church of Galatia, who had wandered down this gradual slope. And they had found themselves in a place where they were wondering, what do we do now? And Paul gives them a stern correction. Hey, turn back to God who saved you, who loves you, who cherishes you. Turn back to Him for your salvation. And at the very end of his book in Galatians chapter 6, in verse 9, he gives them an encouragement that is for you and for me as well. We'll look at that. Galatians chapter 6, verse 9, this is what it says. It says, "Let us not become weary in doing good. For at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up." This tells us a couple things. The first one is that doing good often becomes wearisome, often becomes tiring, often becomes boring. If you've ever heard, "Oh, Christians seem very boring," it's because they're making choices that are not as exciting as this world makes. Doing good, making wise choices is often boring, tedious, and wearisome. That we all are tempted to become the bad guy. That we're all tempted to make choices that we ought not. In fact, C.S. Lewis, a very wise guy, not like a wise aleck like some of you guys are, but a wise guy, he says this. He says, "No man or woman knows how bad he is until he has tried very hard to be good. A silly idea is current that good people do not know what temptation means. Only those who try to resist temptation know how strong it is." Translation, being good gets tiring if you try to resist bad by being good. Right? Being good becomes tiring as you resist bad by being good. Some of you guys made commitments in summer camp to follow the Lord more. And right after summer camp, I'm sure you were tempted to give in. And if you tried to resist it, you realized how hard the temptation is. How difficult it is to hold on, to cling on to the Lord. For me, every time I would go home from summer camp, my brother was right there. To remind me of how selfish I was, to remind me of how inconsiderate I was, to remind me of my mistakes. And every time it'd be a temptation to fall back in, and it was very hard to resist, and I gave in more than I should have. I'm sure some of you guys know the temptation to give in, to grow weary in doing good. But Paul tells us to not grow weary in doing what is good, and he gives us a reason why. And I think this will be our encouragement for today. This will be something that we can hold on to, that we can cling to. He says, "Let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up." What is a harvest? A lot of you are farmers. Some of you are farmers. Many of you, all of you, probably know a farmer here in town. You might know what a harvest is. A harvest is when you collect the crops at the end of growing them, right? It is the highlight of farming. You collect the crops to make a profit off of them. Paul is connecting a harvest, receiving benefits, reaping blessings from doing good. If you know farmers, you know that they put in a ton of work for a harvest. And if I were a farmer, I would be tempted to give up if it was really difficult. But we have a lot of strong farmers around here who do not give up. Why? Because there's a harvest coming. Because there's something to hold on to, there's something to get to, there's some goal that they're going after. And life is the same way. You see, when you are tempted to give in to the temporary highs, that will take you to deeper lows. If you remember the last Covational. When you're tempted to jump to greater highs, that will take you to deeper lows in your future. I want you to remember this: that your future peace, that your future life, that your future self will thank you for not giving up. Your future self will not regret you choosing to cling to what is good. Because what Paul has told us is that we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. See, the strongest people that I know have endured temptations and have overcome them through practice, through determination, through accountability, through prayer, through discipline. The strongest people I know have endured much. Will you be someone like that as well in this time, in this season? What would it look like to not give up doing what is good?